Hello bass family and welcome to Everything Bass. Today's video we're just going to cover some of the most common questions I'm asked about slapping. These come from emails from you guys, comments to previous videos, direct communication, and some from my past when I've done clinics for different companies or anyway, there's questions I seem to get over and over from students from many different resources, and I kind of put them on my iPad so I wouldn't forget them. So I don't have a cool teleprompter, so I'm going to look down at this. So the first question, should I use light gauge strings to slap? And that's personal. You know, anyone who says, oh, you can't use light gauge strings to slap, that's their opinion based on their experiences. And they're not completely correct. I know some of the most amazing slappers that have custom-made strings where like the bass strings are heavier and the D and G or C strings in some cases are like almost guitar strings. So it's what you need to do to express the music the way you want, to have the bass feel the way you want. Some people ask me, like on my 4-string, I use 45 to 105. That's my gauge I like, which is a medium gauge, not that heavy, not that light. Now, one thing I will tell you that is not an opinion, but when you have a lighter gauge string, like if you go for super light strings, where the E string's very, very, under 100 gauge, sometimes that will rob you of some of the warmth and the kind of the bassiness of the string. It might sound a little more clicky and a little less foundational. Other people think, wow, if I use light gauge strings, I must break them all the time. I've never found that because I've experimented, or I've slapped on 6 strings with really small, C strings on top, and no, I think the quality of strings right now is so high, and in fact, it's funny, I've broken a couple of my D and G strings on stage, but it's very rare, but I've also twice broken the E string just by thumbing it, and it was a 105. So on the E string, I should tell you, it was a problem with my bridge. Now, if you're curious about that, whenever you break a string, it's good just for a moment to like pull the string back up and see where it broke. And I noticed after breaking 2 E strings, not even close together, quite a lot of time had passed, but it was breaking at the saddle on my bridge, which is right here, and it was this bass. Actually, that's funny, what a coincidence. And when I looked at it and I took a little bit of tissue paper and I drug it through the groove in the saddle, and sure enough it tore, which means I had a little bit of a raised rough spot that was just sitting there as I'm slapping, cutting the strings ever so slightly every time, and then I would break my E string. So I just took it to a shop. I didn't have the tools where I was when I discovered this, and they just smoothed that out, and I haven't broken an E string since. So, do you have to slap with light gauge strings? Do you have to slap with heavy strings? Do you have to slap with custom gauge strings? It's personal to you. Try, experiment. I would say be cautious, because I've had students have some issues with like maybe entry-level basses where maybe the necks aren't super strong, where they put a super heavy gauge, try that, and then buy a super light gauge set and try that, and all of a sudden their neck's kind of all cattywampus. And but again, very rare. So there's no answer for that. And anyone who gives you an answer, they're just expressing their opinion based on their own personal style. You can try it, which I've done. I've had guys suggest like custom gauge string sets. I'll try them, and if I like it, I would use it. But for the most part, it was just through my playing and trying different things. Okay, second question. Does my action have to be really low to slap? No, it doesn't. Same kind of answer as the first about your string gauges. Action is a personal thing, but I will tell you, if the action's too low, on my experience, and I've been blessed to have really high quality basses, where the action can be set very low and not create a lot of buzzes and rattles. But just in my opinion, and again, this is my opinion, try your own thing. When the action's really low and I'm slapping, there's something about it that makes the bass sound thinner. It's like, maybe it's because here's my fingerboard and here's the string height. And when it's real low and I thumb on it, maybe there's just not enough energy, that it's not enough time or not enough distance to cover to get me the sound I wanted. Because this particular bass, once again, it's kind of coincidental. I met a great guitar tech down in Los Angeles, gave him this bass to get set up before I did a series of shows. And he was in love with the bass. He said, "Man, I set the accent up. It's whisper low and doesn't buzz at all." I'm like, "Oh, cool." But when I slapped on it, it sounded different to me, and so I just busted out my my wrenches and I kind of raised it back up to where I liked it, and sure enough, the bass sounded more full. That made me want to think, okay, is this just to this bass? So I tried it with other basses. I lowered the action really low, slapped on it, listened to it, and in my like what I want out of the instrument, a medium action, not super high, but a medium action seems to have the more fuller sound. Plus, on certain basses, it gives me a little more room to get my fingers under the string, like where I like to pop. So yeah, again, personal. Now I will tell you, when you set a bass up for a technique, like same thing, like guys tapping, sometimes they set the action really low, but then they get a session where they're playing Motown style fingerboard licks and they're wondering, ooh, why is it buzzing all of a sudden? You have to be careful. I like a medium action because it handles pretty much all my techniques. It feels the same. So when I go in and I'm tapping on a session or I'm slapping on a session, it sounds clean. It gets the sound I want out of it. But that's my experience. I've known a lot of players who play with multiple instruments and take a lot of basses to studio, and they'll set them up for particular things. They'll have a bass set up with really dead strings and the action really high, and then they'll set up a bass really action low with lighter strings, and that's just because that's how they have found success. And that's perfectly a great answer. There's no wrong answer. Number 3 comes up a lot, and it definitely came up a lot right after Les Claypool came on the scene, and people were asking, can I slap on a fretless? And you can, but be cautious of a couple things. When you're slapping on a fretless, first of all, you gotta make sure your intonation is really good, which is that you're playing right at the point where the note is in tune, and you're not a little above and a little below. And sometimes when we do slap techniques, our hands moving around really fast, we might miss some of those accurate points, and so we're slapping and it's rhythmically cool, but it's unsettling because you're just off out of tune a little bit. But the bigger issue I found, and it's not from my personal experience, because I don't really like the sound of slapping on fretless, even though I've heard so many guys do it and it sounds great. Just to my techniques, it's not something I pursued. But I've had students that pursue it and sound great, but have had problems with their fingerboard after a long time. You have a wood fingerboard, even a hardwood fingerboard, and they'll slap on it and you've got metal hitting wood repeatedly over time, and then they'll have some issue when they go to play standard, that it just doesn't sound right, and there's a bunch of weirdness to it. So they'll have, each case they've had to have their fretboard kind of resurfaced, replayed. Now, if you're really into the sound, there's a cool option, and I've known a bunch of different luthiers that do it. I know a bunch of different repair guys that do it, is that they can actually coat your fingerboard in a hard substance. It's skipping my mind what they used, but and I know that some people use one thing, some people use the other thing, but it's usually a really hard, clear surface over the fingerboard. Now, it's funny, I've played some basses built with a really clear, hard coating over the fretless fingerboard, and I'll play standard fretless, and I kind of like it. It's got a kind of a growl to it that I really like. But that also will protect your fingerboard longer from that. So yes, you can slap on a fretless fingerboard, but be cautious. Make sure you're always in tune. That's just horrible. When you do anything on fretless, if you're out of tune, consistently, we all slip up here and there. But if you're consistently out of tune, it's a bad experience for everyone involved. And then really think about it, because especially if you don't have a lot of money to invest in resurfacing your fingerboard, and I'm not saying it's going to happen after an hour of slapping on your fingerboard. It could, I guess, and that's really bad fingerboard material. A lot of fingerboard material is very hard, but anything presented with contact with a harder substance over time is going to, something's going to give. I always think back of a photo I saw of a place where there's a brick wall, and everyone would always go and lean their bikes up against the brick wall. And after, who knows how long, where the handlebar would be up against the wall, the brick actually had a notch out of it. So people actually then, oh, that's great. It held their bike better. But that was just over time of a metal handlebar leaned up against a brick. Over time, it actually, put a dent in the brick. I can also mention a popular game Twitch streamer, Tim the Tapman, has a dent in his head from his headphones because he wears headphones for so long it actually created a dent in his head, which is hilarious. But just goes to show you, it's common sense. One material, another material, constantly in contact over how knows, usually quite a long time. One of the materials is going to give away. So, will slapping shorten the life of my strings? That's a newer question. In my experience, not just slapping. Now it's hard for me to, I haven't done like a double blind study where one bass I put new strings on, same brand, another bass I put same strings on, one I slap only on, one I only fingerstyle on. I haven't done that. But I know when my strings die, and I know how much I've slapped, and I don't think it does. We're really in a great time. Man, string manufacturers are awesome right now. I started in the 80s. There were a lot of bass string manufacturers, and some of the bass strings were really weird. I mean, there was times when, I'm not going to mention any names because that wouldn't be fair, but where, I'd buy a set, get home, and one of the strings just would sound like it was rubber. It had no brightness to it at all. And so there was just issues through that. But I haven't had that in decades. I think my hat's off to string manufacturers. It's such an important part of our music experience. And now that there's consistent quality through I think every manufacturer I've tried, the strings have always been consistently good. So I don't think you have to really worry about that. Now, it's funny, what can shorten the life of your strings is something you should be aware about, and that's your hands. Get in the habit of just washing your hands before you play. Because you can have dirt and oil, something you don't realize, eat some chips and you've got some oil on your strings, you have some french fries, whatever, then you play, that oil transfers to strings, that oil attracts dirt, and all of a sudden your strings are dead sooner. So that's definitely one thing. And you can also get in the habit of getting some rubbing alcohol and a rag, make it something like a t-shirt that doesn't have a lot of lint to it, and then just, clean your strings, because really strings die because at first because of just hand grit and grime. And different people, like I remember talking to one string manufacturer talking about people with acidic sweat. Maybe they're like really a lot of coffee drinkers or whatnot. For whatever, their metabolism makes a sweat that's pretty acidic, and they burn through strings really fast, and they make complaints. Oh, these strings didn't last for me, and these strings didn't last for me. Yet you got someone else, like I actually can get quite a bit of life out of my strings. But I do wash my hands a lot, and I'm cautious. I don't like the feel of my hands dirty when I play. I don't like the feel. Forget about what it does to my strings. So I have a tendency to always wash my hands before I play. My strings last for a long time. But I can't say that slapping really shortens it. I've broken more strings just playing fingerstyle than I am slapping. But again, that's hard to quantify because I slap in the bass too. So maybe it was just that point, that tipping point when the string was just worn out, and I was trying to get a little more life out of it, that when I was playing fingerstyle, the string broke. I will say playing live and breaking a string is just an awesome experience. I remember being in Los Angeles playing with a industrial metal band and breaking a string on stage, slapping, and the crowd just roared. It was awesome. So I don't know, silver lining, because it cost me a lot of money to get another set of strings at a time when I didn't have much money. All right, so I hope that answers some questions for you. Now, there's probably a lot more questions about slapping. That's what the comments section of this video is for. Just write them down. Just put in a comment, hey, I'm curious about, and I'll compile them and I'll do another video, because I love these kind of more conversational style of videos, and hopefully they're as educational and informative as the ones where I'm actually, giving you an exercise or teaching you how to play through changes or something like that. All right, thank you so much. My brothers and sisters in bass, you make life much better, and I'm honored to be able to talk with you and share with you, and I look forward to hearing from you what you thought about this video. Please like, share, subscribe, do all those things that you hear every YouTube creator talk about, because it really does help. It helps our emotions, but it also helps us grow the channel. All right, guys, see you at the next video.